welcome everyone. Today, and for those of you who are new to these sessions, is a session where we just share tips and tricks of using Zoho CRM. The whole point is to answer real users' questions. So feel free to ask. Please interrupt. So what we thought for today was to share a little bit more about automation and how to use that for sales teams. I just want to make sure we have other. I have other team members from Gravity. It's myself, Anna Yodley, a partner and a user of Zoho for several years now, and also a Zoho authorized partner. Nicole is also on the call, also working with me at Gravity, and Kayla. So they'll be also supporting with answering some of the questions that show up. So do feel free to ask. Just a quick question. Is everyone in the call using Zoho currently, Zoho CRM?
Yeah.
Yep, sure. Can you give me just a feel for how long you've been using it?
Since 2016.
Cool. So you're a master pro. So you'll be sharing some tips for sure.
Under the gun already. Sure.
No, absolutely not. David, I know you are because you joined us before. Rajiv, you had your hand raised as well. And if you're still in, Jack. So it looks like there's an error, Jack, with your microphone. So you can also type on the Q&A section on the left. Okay. So main goal of, it looks like Jack's microphone might be coming up. So the main goal of these sessions is really to share and to have a lot of interaction. That's why we allow everyone to be able to speak and raise their hands and ask any questions. To make sure that we kind of always add value, we always bring some topics. So today, we thought as a team was to use those functionalities or share those functionalities that a lot of our clients ask us about on a daily basis sometimes. And kind of three things I think could really help you or your teams. So one is proactively reaching to prospects using the automation in the CRM and what's available. Creating consistent touch points, how you do that in time and kind of use workflows for that. And then there's some more recent functionalities in these workflows that allow you to kind of to follow up, and you could be using it to follow up with quotes sent or requests or just even simple emails. So that's what I thought of going through. So feel free to jump in anytime. So proactively reaching to prospects. So I'm going to share a demo example of and what I kind of recommend for you to use if you want to do one of two things. So to reach proactively to prospects, or you could also use this for customers, obviously. But in this example, I'm going to say, let's say we want to reach to prospect people. You can use workflows to mimic a one-on-one email, and I'll go into that in a minute. Or you can also use the mass email functionality to then trigger several schedule actions. So I'm going to start with this, which is kind of a bit of the broader one, and then we'll go into the more detail and more complex workflows. So let's jump right in, because nothing like seeing it live. All right. So let's look into a CRM account. So what I want to show you is, let's go into contacts, and I created this very demo example to see how you can use this. So let's say you want to create a way to kind of reaching out to leads or prospects you have inside your CRM. You already have their emails, but you want to make sure everyone gets an email and there's something happens based on their activity, on what they do. So one thing you can easily do is you can have a whole view of your contacts, but I would advise you, when you're doing this, part of your morning task when you come into the office, is you can just create a selection of your contacts. So let's say you're building all the ones who are your prospects. So I'm going to call this view, I don't know if you're all familiar with creating a view, so let's just create one from scratch. So when you're in this section here, you have an option at the bottom to say custom view. So I would definitely advise you to create, let's say this would be your prospects. And your prospects, who are people inside your contacts, obviously you need to have the fields to tag that. So you could have something like an account type. You could have something, well, when they joined, what was the source of that. For example, let's say everyone that has a lead source, let's say everyone that came from a list you purchased, for example. Okay. And then I advise you to create on that view everything you want to see right away every time you go. So you want to make sure you have like the company they belong to. Zoho brings first and last name by default, so I would just get rid of it. I prefer just to have one field for name, so I kind of get rid of the other ones. I'm not going to be making phone calls right now. It's going to be an email, but if I wanted to, it's very easy to drag and drop. And then you could have other things. For example, let's say you kind of want to, if you're calling someone or you want to have a feel for where they are physically, so let's just put state and maybe city. Every time I go to this view, I will have these columns coming up. So let's just do that. Okay. So let's say I now have a huge list of my prospects. Let's say these are my prospects, and now I want to send an email because I want to make sure that something will be triggered after that action. So if I want to do, and again, I do it once, but then I let the system, the automation behind the system, run it for me, is let's say I want to send an email to everyone. So you can select these contacts, but then you say, okay, I don't want to send it to these guys because I don't want to send to in this company. Sorry, let me go back. Okay, so you could select the ones. It will tell you how many are selected. You have an option to send an email, and every time you select more than one contact, you will show that you will have the mass email option available. If you're just sending one, you don't have that option. So what matters here is to have your templates for what you want to say. So let's say I'm going to just have an email here that I already have. I can send it immediately or I can schedule it for later. So that's something else I can be planning if, I'm an early starter in the day and I just want emails to go at a more decent hour. I can do that, or a specific day because it makes sense. So you can define who will be sending it. You can define, if you have more users, you can define where the replies will go to. So I'll say, for example, I could be sending this on behalf of several member teams, but then I want the reply to go to each owner of that record. So that's really useful, for example, if you're in a bit of a position of scheduling, even for your team, and then you want to make sure your team follows up with those emails. And then what you can do, and this is really what cool part of the automation is, once you send this automated email, then you have several follow-up actions that you can have. And this is where it gets interesting. And that's what a workflow doesn't give you. That's why I'm starting here. So if you want actions based on what that person is doing, that prospect, you would have kind of two really interesting ones. I would say the open or the click. If you have something like if you're directing them to a page on your website, to a case study you're sharing, or the coolest changes in your building, whatever you're trying to bring to the table. Let's say you want to know that every time an email is open, let's say you want your salesperson to follow up with a call, right? Or yourself. So you can configure a call to be scheduled. And let's say this will be follow up with a new prospect from the list we just bought. So you're not randomly having someone call 200 contacts, just start on A and go from there. You can actually have a lot more qualified using a better use of time of your sales team. The record owner would be the person who gets the call, so that makes sense. So even if you're setting this up, you're not getting the calls for yourself. That would be who owns the contact. And you could say, let's put the call starting like 15 minutes or something that's not 5 minutes. I think it's a bit creepy if you've opened an email and then you get a phone call right away. Even an hour, 30 minutes after this email is open. So let's see what this will do. So this will say that when the email is opened by a contact, you will have this follow-up. So it will create a scheduled call. Now, you could configure other things. You could update fields if you want to mark that, but that doesn't really do anything for you unless there's another automation coming out of it. Or you could have a task as well if you want someone to do something about that prospect. But again, what I'm focusing here is really schedule something to really happen, whether it's an email or in this case, it's a call. So it's sales activity really happening. So once you want to, you also have a check depending on the version you have of the CRM, you'll have a different capacity. So this is an enterprise CRM. edition. So I have 1,000 emails I can send individually per day. So those would be my counter if I already have sent something today. So I could have this done, and it will schedule this section. All right. So I'm going to kind of go back because I don't want really to do this. So this is really what you could do. You could also, if you have someone, for example, opening, if you have a case study or document you want to send, make sure you have a link in your email. So there's something for people to interact with when they get your email. And then the action could be then, okay, after they followed up on something, let's say a day after we get a call. Okay, so go back. I'm going to cancel it here, but I have an example. So the cool thing is, remember, build a view. So you're selecting the people you want to, and you make sure that, this makes sense. And then you run your automation. If on the other side, you want to make sure, let's do a bit of a different example. Consistent touch points. And I really like to mimic a one-on-one. So emails that feel like one-on-one, or one-to-one, sorry. So for this, the best that the CRM has, on my point of view, but if you have different experiences, please share, because I'm really interested in learning with you as well, is to set up a workflow. And a workflow can allow you, depending on how you space emails, to have 1, 2, 3 months of emails scheduled. And they could be more, it just depends how deep you want to go and how many emails you want to create. And this is also good because you will have workflows different for prospects or for clients that bought from you in the past, for example, or for current active clients that you just want to keep a touch point with because, maybe they've ordered last year, or you just haven't heard on that from them. So for this, the workflow is the best. So let's get into the back end here. So your setup action section. Under automation, you have workflow rules. So let's create a new one. And the main thing here is to say, what module am I working? So I'm currently working in contacts. If you would be building something to follow up with leads, you would have to select the lead module. So currently all my emails are in contacts. So I'm going to follow up with customers. So this is it maybe a little bit generic. So let's make it, so let's say these are going to be like 4 touch points email with customers. Auto, so I know I'm not doing, and then I could describe who this goes to. So customers who bought over 1 year ago, for example. And this is you think it's a bit of a faff to write the descriptions. Trust me, in 1 month's time, you won't remember what you set that workflow to. So it's very important. You gotta have a very quick view of what it is. So when do you want to do this? So in this case, we could be doing, so one idea is when they get added to the CRM. So you could make sure that every customer has a touch point. So you could say when it's created or edited, I advise you not, in this case, not to repeat this workflow, because this means every time you edit the contact, it would trigger a new email. So I just want to send the workflow once. So I'm going to create or edit a contact, and I'm going to say when I add someone, for example, where, let me have an example here. So I'm going to use the lead source, but you could have an account type. For example, if I say that these are my, system, I know that these contacts would be key, or let's get another example here. You could have a clients list if you had a client download list. In this case, this is really the best list for me to try and use. And then you could use other things. For example, emailed is not opt-out, so it's not selected, because you want to make sure you're not sending to someone who doesn't want to get emails from you. And you could go forward. You can go really deep into setting this, and this will go into funnel, so you make sure that it's going to the right people. So if you have customers in your CRM, you should have account type customer, and I'm setting to those. Okay. This can also be flexible. You could say one or the other. So if you click here, you'll have and or, which when you have a lot of variables is useful. And then this is the beauty of it, is when are things going to happen? So you can have instant actions, which for me would be the first email. The system allows you to schedule 5 emails. So if you use the first one, it's total of 6. So that means, every time a contact is created or edited, from this list or with an account type or something, as I usually like, I'm going to show you, which is I create a Gravity, for example, email workflow, and I say if this one is to send email 1 or series 2, depending how many emails you're going for, then when I select this in my contacts, that's what will trigger. So it's not going to all my clients, it's just going to the ones I select. Okay. And then build your instant action, which would be an email would go right away. But if you don't want it right away, you could also just play with scheduled actions. So this could be, let's say 5 days after it's been, actually 7 days after it's been added, and I'll share why I selected 7. I want, and the rule trigger is this rule, right? So this is when the contact is created or edited. You go ahead and you create your email notification. I already have a series of them here, but I'll do one from scratch. So I'll have to give it a name. So I'm just going to demo. So customer email 1. I choose who the recipients are. So who should be getting this? This is very obvious, but some people get confused in the screen. It's really the contact email, right? It's the email you have in the contact that will get, which is your customer in this case. You could have additional ones if you want to get it yourself, for example, or if you want another email to go to. So I could just add my, especially when I'm testing it out. And then I need a template. So I can create a template from scratch. I'm going to use one that I have here set up for this, for example, that I've set up for my client. And I'm going to say this is going from this email, but actually, no, I want it to go from the current user's email and back to their, not current, sorry, current would be me, the one who sets up the workflow, record owner. So I have different salespeople who will be sending this email from, and these will be all automated, so they don't have to touch anything. Another very cool thing, if you are on a paid version of Zoho, you'll have Zia. If you haven't seen it before, it's amazing. It's really a Zoho artificial intelligence element. So I always like to select, if it's not a hard thing, like launching something or sending an update to a customer portal that has a time and a date, anything that is prospecting your customer emails that are not time dependent, I like to use the best time. So it will send the email. It will definitely send it. If it has enough data, it will send it to the customer on the best time for them to open the email. If it doesn't, it will send when you set your parameters. Okay. Oh, I'm just checking a question. That's feedback taken that we need to take from Rajiv. Okay, so what else would you be doing here? Obviously, if you really want to make the process as easy and interesting and profitable, you want to make sure you schedule another email. So let's say now it's going to be like 14 days or 21 days after the trigger date. So it's always considering this initial date that's going to trigger this workflow. And let's go for email 2. So now you can select email 2. I already have one here, so I'll just go for it. And so forth. So you can keep building your workflow, save it, and it will trigger every time these conditions are in place. And it will kind of tell you as well that Zia here. So, pay attention. It's not going to go exactly at the time you set it up, but it's going to use a suggested time by Zia. So this is something that could, with one step. So it takes a little bit of time to set up because you have to do two things. You have to have a sense of what are the key elements you have in the CRM. So you have this field set up and your email templates. So that's kind of where you start. And then when you set up the workflow, it's running. And depending on how long this goes, you could be having emails going out frequently. Quick tips on this. So this could be sending 1,000 of emails on your behalf during the week. I always advise you to come here and let's set this up. So let's go to your module, the module you'll be working with, and let's say in this case is contacts. I'm going to add the field now so you can see it, how it works. So I have a bit of an automation section where I just put everything that helps me to understand what is going on. It's very useful to have these batches and the workflow. So especially if you're setting more than one, you can always create a pick list field. So select the pick list field call it your, auto workflows. So you kind of know what's going out, and then select, for example, sales, prospect, offer 1, right? And this is going to have a series of emails, or customer auto follow-up. What I want to mention here is that it's important that whatever you do is always a pick list, so you don't have to type anything, so you won't have errors. Sales workflow 3. I'm just going to give you an example. What I want to make sure is that when you do this, you can't have 2 going on. So you'll have 1. So you make sure that your client's not getting emails that just sound weird because they're coming from different sources or maybe at the same time. Okay, looks like we have a cool section here. So let's save this field. And then the other one you can see here that I added, it's always very useful to just have a button that stops everything, whatever is going out. So the best to use for that is a checkbox button. So you just add it and say, this will be a stop all automation. Okay. So that means I will always use this field when I build my workflows. Okay.
Hey, Anna, it looks like we have a question that came in about.
Yes. Thank you. Let's look into that. So let me show you the workflow again. So what kind of conditions can be used? For example, can I use a condition when a new person signs up or when a person downloads a webinar? So if you have, for example, when a person signs up or a person downloads a webinar coming in as a lead, which would be a good example. So you have a form on your website for someone to download a document, and that comes in as a lead, then the workflow could be for a new lead created with that lead source. That would be the best way to do it. So you know that that email only goes to a person who downloaded the webinar. Just let me know if that answers your question. If someone signs up, for example, this is very useful. So let me show you an example of a form here, of what you can have as a form. So for example, on your website, let's say you have a request a quote form. So this form, as soon as I add and I select anything in here, I'm going to test this one. Okay. Kind of need it by tomorrow, because you always do. Okay, let's use my name for this. You can see how this works. I think I have all the key ones. So let's look into our Zoho CRM. So right now it's going to come in as a new lead. And the way I would set this up was I would have a workflow specific. In that form, there's a hidden field you don't see when you set up the form, where you would have a lead source saying this is a quote, or this is the webinar download, or this is the sign up for that event. That brings in that person as a lead, and then you trigger an email saying, hey, thank you for reaching out, or here is the download of the webinar. It's a good way as well to validate that that email is valid and that someone really filled out a form with something that works. Okay. So you would have your details here, and you could use, usually I would use the lead source or any other field you set up as an option to add to the workflow. Okay. Okay, so last but not least, and let me know if I answered your question, is auto follow-up on quotes or emails sent. So here is a bit of a new thing you can do. So one is already existing, also using workflows. So workflows can be used for a lot of things. You could auto follow up on quotes if you want to know, sometimes we're just using so much time, so much sales time, and not just sales, operations, manufacturing, depending on which business you're on, of estimating teams, of building a quote, and then what happens with that quote. So kind of 2 ways to follow up on this. If you're using the potential section of your CRM and you have a status for, you should set a stage for quote sent. So if you're using potentials or opportunities to track your sales activity, you could say, okay, after a quote is sent, 3 days after a quote sent, I want an email to be. I saw you have a question. Let me just kind of wrap up on this one. If you want to set up a workflow So an automated email that goes out. The mass email doesn't really work for that, so that would have to be. So I already built one, so I'm just going to have a quick view because we're kind of running out of time. This will be executed when the potential is created or edited. I only need to do it once because you don't send another quote. You're not going to update that field. So once you send the quote to the client, stage is quote sent. So what I'm using here is to say every time it's marked stage is quote sent, and I could have a, if I add that email of stop all workflows, if I wanted to do that as well, you can still do that. So you don't run automation. So you could have that and say it's not selected. And then I don't want an instant action because that's a bit scary, but I want like 3 days after it's done, let's follow up on a quote. Or a very good rule as well is to have 7 days. So if you have 7, 7, 14, 21 multiples, that makes sure that it's always a business day. Usually it will almost be because you probably are sending it, you're working on a business day. So that makes it easier. But you could do this, like 1 day after you've sent the quote. So this allows you to send an email, and on that email, then you want to bring, I'm just going to kind of show you the template. Here you could have just simple text, or you could be using elements from your potential section. So for example, if you have an RFQ number or an estimate number that you add to the CRM, or if you want to use the subject of the email you get, one of our clients, for example, uses that because that's how the estimating team will be looking for, is the email that was sent. So whatever you use, you can always come here on your template, and if you just press hashtag, it will bring you all the fields in your CRM that you can use. So that's a very useful way. So if you had here your quote number or your PO number, you could use it and it will just populate. I'm going to send it now. I'll discard these changes. Also a little trick that I did here was to make it feel even more personal. I just used the person's name, the contact first name there on the subject line. So this is the subject line that's going to go on the email. So I'll just say, hey, John, are there any updates? And then the email will say what we have here. So this is one way to follow up with a stage. So let me just check on questions I have here. So this has been answered. For the workflow creation with example, how about a customer for a reorder? So I might need a little bit more detail there. Because if you have a reorder, for example, if you create that as a potential, I think, yeah, David, if you create that as a potential, you could have potentials that are reorders. So you could set a workflow with that criteria. So for that, obviously, you need to make sure that you always need to think a little bit of what type of field is going to trigger this. So let's go into potentials. And in your case, I think you want to remind someone for a reorder. So what you can do here is you have your closing date that you could use. So let's say everyone who closed a potential of this type, 1 year, after 1 year or after 6 months, send this email. So you could be using your closing date, and you could use like a type to know that you just want this for that type of customer or the customer who bought that type of product. So again, for example, let's say I would have here a type of product ordered. Okay, you'll have option 1, option 2. These will be your products. Okay. And then you'll be using a date. So always remember, if you want to trigger things based on date, you have to have a field that's set up as date. So always avoid the single line fields. That's really just for text for notes or something that can't be a pick list or a date or a dollar if you want to run calculations in the future. Okay, so on your workflows, now I could use that field. It looks like we have a good tip here. So let's create a rule. I believe you can set the time delay to business days. It's the second item in the drop down. Oh, I hadn't seen that one. I can't wait to test that one out. So test reorders. Okay. So what would be this? Let's say I'm using the closing date, and this would be, say, custom. Oh, actually, I think I had the option of 6 months. Oh, I don't. Let's be custom. Okay, let's say, all right, 6 months after closing date. Execution time, where it's going to be once. And then what do I want to do 6 months after that closing date? I'm using the closing date, but you could have a installed date, for example, if something was installed and you want an alert after that. And then now let's just use that type of product ordered is product 1. And for product 1, let's say you want an email that alerts your client, and then you would build your email notification. Okay, so kind of the same process. So I can't wait actually to see if they have business days now. Jeff, I believe you can set the time delay to business days. It's the second item in the drop-down. I might need your help here because I'm not seeing it on my... Oh, I think we lost Jeff.
On to a different meeting.
So if anyone else knows about that functionality, sometimes what happens is you could have different versions of Zoho. So sometimes if you know there's a feature and you can't see it, even if there's something you're seeing in my screen that you can't see on your Zoho CRM, make sure to send an email to support@zohocrm.com because they could release that feature for you. So there's a lot of stuff that is, and it's different from account to account. So if you see something that's of interest, make sure to check if it's in your CRM. The other option you have, and I know we kind of passed time, but it's setting a workflow for emails sent. So this is a really cool option that you can use. So workflows obviously can be now set for every module. I'm kind of risking it that. So you could create one for emails. So this is something relatively recent, I think, with these capabilities. So let me just call it a demo on this case because I don't want to save it. So the cool thing is that you can execute a rule when an income email is received, unreplied, or open and unreplied. For example, I can do this if I have really bad memory to replying to emails. I can say, well, I opened, but I didn't reply, so send me an alert. Or more interesting, for sales, for example, outgoing email is sent, or simply it was an open or unreplied in 3 days, for example. And then you can start playing, okay, who should be getting these emails? What conditions would you like? So do you want to check emails? And you could say, yes, I just want us to do emails that have on the subject line contains the word quote, because I always quote, or estimate. Okay, I just really want to alert for those ones because those are the top priority. Anything that exists at an email level, you could be using it, or that the sender is this, or that the sent to is this, or that has an attachment, because I know there's a quote if it has an attachment. Who does it apply to? So in this case, let's say it's contacts, because they are a contact if I send a quote, and then not all contacts who I send quotes, just the ones that match certain criteria. So you could also even go deeper and deeper. So this is really cool, and then you will be getting an alert. It's an automated alert, so you don't need to set, sorry, let's just say all contacts. And then you can say, okay, how do I want to be notified? What type of information do I want to get? Do I want to update a field, build a task? All the options then. So this is a cool feature. Okay, well, we had I think we checked a lot of stuff today. Any other questions you have, feel free to send us an email. Any of us, myself, Nicole, Kayla. Check our website if you want to create a free account of Zoho. If you don't have one currently, or if you're considering, or if you're just not sure what it does, feel free to ping us an email. We'll be happy to help you. And if I think we have all questions set up there. If